Hello, my beautiful friend. Welcome to A Time to Care the Caregivers podcast. Today in the show, I have Suzy McNamara. She's the author of The Silkworm, The Magician, and The Sister Tree, A Tale of Love and Loss, which is coming May of 2026.
So soon,
Soon,
next month. Great.
get yourselves ready for that. This is a memoir that focuses on her past year and how the loss of her sister to pulmonary disease and the loss of her husband to early onset Alzheimer's changed her life, and how 5 years of caregiving changed her life. So, welcome, Suzy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show. That's so nice.
I'm so excited to have you because since we started connecting, I was interested in talking about how caregiving changes us. And you talk about that so wonderfully. So why don't we start from the beginning? Tell us
Sure.
like how your story began.
So 5 years before my husband died, so now it would be 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. We had a wonderful marriage. We were so close, but I noticed things changing. Our connection didn't seem to be as strong, like that invisible string was kind of fraying. And when he was diagnosed, it was like all of a sudden I went from being a wife who was sort of upset because I didn't know what was happening to becoming a caregiver. When I sort of switched into that kind of mama bear mode or that instant caregiving mode. But becoming a caregiver really changes the way, I mean, it changes your life, obviously. Your every hour of every day is changed in an instant. And also you become the wife of somebody who is dying, which really affected me right from the beginning because I knew right away his life, would be short. And you go from being a wife to just being this totally different person. And the way you feel about yourself, the way you feel about your purpose, and the way that others relate to you, which can be sometimes devastating because people that you're close with don't really know how to deal with you anymore because you really are this different person. And have to do a lot of work and kind of processing your new identity, which can be very difficult at the same time as you're overwrought with stress and sometimes financial burdens and certainly time burdens. And it's just really scary. Alzheimer's can be very scary. You don't know what's coming next. And the person who was your partner, who you would have kind of gone through this together for most of your marriage, all of a sudden, he's not your partner anymore. You're the one taking care of him. So it's pretty dramatic.
We just got a puppy 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
And it changes your routines and your habits
Right,
and your everything. And one of the things that I even made a post on social media about how when something happens and we lose, like, I didn't lose my identity for having another dog, but I'm losing
right.
myself because I'm spending more time. And one of the things that I find really interesting right now is that I started prioritizing everything in my to-do list. And I still haven't prioritized myself. What is going to be my me time, even though I'm spending all of these extra time? So I know this is a puppy. I know I called it for, and I knew what I was getting at. But what can you tell us, like, about and Alzheimer's? Like, you're not prepared and you're not planning for that. It just
No,
happens. So, how
right.
did you cope with your whole life changing? Because I know you were a social butterfly and you were going all these places, and all of a sudden, all of that ended.
Right. Well, there's a sense of urgency. I think I became instantly so protective of him and it sort of pushed everything aside. So you don't really have a choice. I think that's one thing that's different. And that can be pretty destabilizing too. Because we like to feel like we have some kind of control over our lives and how we're going to put ourselves forward in the world. and that is just taken away from you. The same time that his identity and certainly his control and the way he viewed himself was taken away, that was happening to me as well. It was a crisis situation from the beginning, and I really could only focus on that one thing. And what was difficult was I have a lot of friends. I'm lucky to have a lot of friends and a lot of close family members. And I was kind of the person that was there for people. Not to, maybe I just like to think of myself that way, but I think in some ways that was true. And then all of a sudden, I couldn't be there for anybody but my husband. I really couldn't be, especially in the beginning and before I got a little bit more used to the pace of it and more used to just those feelings. Those feelings are just so overwhelming in the beginning, and you have to process them, but you don't really have time to process them. It really is a crisis. When you said about prioritizing and how you really need to take some time to prioritize yourself, that's probably one of the most difficult things for a caregiver to do. They'll always tell you, you got to do something for yourself, which is they're doing it from a place of love. They really are.
Mhm.
But for the caregiver, especially in the beginning, it just feels like another job. Like, oh no, and now I got to do
Yeah.
something for but obviously that's the wrong way to look at it, obviously. But that's how everything is just coming at you at this, incredibly fast pace. And I think that there is some truth to that. I do think you won't really have the time to do a whole lot for yourself for sure. And you might not have the money, because all of a sudden all your finances are really wrapped up in taking care of this person. And in my household, my husband was the primary breadwinner and he lost his job very early on. And that was another stress and another disaster in our household. Um, but it is really important that you try to hold on to as much of yourself as you can because at some point, that's all that's going to be left. Also, you're a wonderful person. Why wouldn't you want to hold on to, those pieces of yourself? That was very difficult. And I think conversations with friends or family members where I could really be honest helped me a lot, sort of gain my sense of myself. And when I did, a lot of the time with caregiving for my husband, especially towards the end, was me just sitting with him. So I would we'd watch a movie or something that we both enjoyed. He wasn't really able to absorb that as much, but it was something that made me feel like myself more or read to him a lot, which we were both very big English literature fans and Irish literature fans. So I would read, some of our favorite stories, which I don't know if he was able to really absorb those either, but just the sound of my voice, I think that really helped. Also, focusing on the day, like the one day at a time thing, as often as you hear that, you hear it a lot because it's true. If we focus, the kids and I, once we started focusing on just making him happy on that day, even for a few moments, like bringing joy to his
Mhm.
life, that really helped me a lot. So, and it helped the kids a lot because the future was so scary, so terrifying. What would happen to him? Would we be able to handle it? What would it be like when he passed away? All that was just way too terrifying to think about. So if we could just focus on that day. And also, we didn't want to focus on what we had lost because with Alzheimer's, you're grieving them from the moment they start changing. And it's just this constant baseline of grief the entire time. And if thought too much about what he had been like, he's the smartest, funniest person always. And if we focused too much on that, it was just too sad. So we really try to focus on that day.
Talking about dogs, I think we need to learn that about them, how they just live in the moment. They are not worrying about the future or hanging to the past. They're just living and enjoying today. And they can be mad, or they can be upset, they can be whatever, but they are in the moment. We're always thinking about the future, about the past, how things could change, how things could be better. And I find it such a joy when you're actually centered in right now and living this moment.
Mm.
What did you find were things that really help you to stay focused on today and not thinking either about the present or the past or the future?
I really did every single day with my husband, which is very common, especially with early onset because it moves pretty quickly. Every day was very different. What he was able to do one day, he would not be able to do just the next morning. And that was scary and difficult, but it also every day really I could think of it as being a new occasion for grief, which I of course did because he had lost a little bit of himself. But I also focused on it being a new challenge. I really we had there are a lot of problems to solve. And the negative part of that that's the negative part. But I would say, okay, what can we solve today? And how are we going to make today joyful? What are we going to do today? And, I couldn't make, I'm such a, I used to think I was a great planner, but I don't think I am. I used to pat myself on the
Think
back of
you
the head.
are.
Oh,
I
thank
think
you.
you're not
No,
giving
I don't
enough
know.
credit.
Thank you. But once I sort of threw away the calendar because I really didn't know, not only how long he was going to live, but, what he'd be able to do the next day. So it really did kind of force me to just focus on, okay, what is he able to do today? Like, what can we do today to bring some joy to him? And it really is very much a mental exercise because it's so difficult to spiral on worries about tomorrow. It really is. And you have to say, speaking of dogs, we were married a long time before he got sick, and it was wonderful. But our one difference was I'm a dog lover, and he was not comfortable around dogs, to say the least. So decided like early on that I could either have a husband or a dog. So I chose my husband, which was the right choice at the time. But I knew he had changed. And I knew that his personality had really changed, which is sad. But at some point, he was worried about dying and leaving me alone, which is so sweet. He was such an incredibly sweet person. And so one day he just kind of woke up and said, "Okay, you should get a dog," which was like shocking news because after 30 years or more of no dog, by the end of the day, I had purchased a dog because I was so excited. And he loved that dog. Talk about bringing joy. And what a gift that little puppy, as hard as it was at the beginning. We named him Yeats after our favorite poet. And he's such a cutie. That really actually did bring joy. And I think you're right. There is something about dogs. First of all, they just love you and they just want to be with you and they think you're the greatest. And for him, when the world was so harsh, and he had so many things have been taken away from him and people treated him differently. It was so difficult. But this dog thought he was the greatest. So really brought a lot of joy.
I think you talk about joy, and that is something that I've been talking for the past probably year, that we don't plan for joy. We plan for everything, but we don't necessarily plan for joy. We probably do plan for it because we plan trips or we plan parties, but we plan the big stuff. We don't plan the everyday joy. We don't plan and it's not like, hey, you wake up and "Hey, how am I going to experience joy today? I'm gonna do this and this is gonna bring me joy." And we're so focused on just the whole thing. So I love that you're talking about experiencing joy because I think that's how you keep going as a caregiver and as a person. It really, I don't think it really matters what you're doing. I think you should experience joy no matter what. But as a caregiver, we forget about how we're going to experience joy with our loved ones, with whom we're caring, with ourselves.
It's really important. Life is a
Yeah,
gift, no matter what troubles you have. This life is a gift. And I think we really owe it to ourselves to show our gratitude for that gift by really trying to bring some joy into our life.
absolutely. And how did you, because every caregiver that I know, it is the same story. At the beginning, everybody helps you for a month or two, but then everybody disappears. You mentioned very clearly how you wanted to hold everything in place, and eventually you decided to let people in and help you. How did you discover that was the go?
Right. I was so protective, but one thing that I noticed early on is Bob had lost his identity in an instant. He became a sick person and a person who valued his intellect so much because he was so smart and so well read, and he really invested in that intellectual part of his life. And he knew that was going, and a lot of it was already gone by the time he was diagnosed. And his identity as a lawyer was taken away from him very early on. But I recognized, as protective as I was, that when he was with his like guy friends, he's got the most amazing group of college friends and of high school friends, especially, and friends from the neighborhood too. And it was really incredible, like the outpouring of support that we got from his guy friends. I think he was just so beloved and he had a dad kind of persona. So I think men just sort of gravitated towards that. Especially his college and his high school friends always treated him that he was the same person. They didn't treat him differently. When you have Alzheimer's, the world, people kind of treat you differently and they're uncomfortable because you might say something unusual and it's just could be. And Bob really internalized those feelings. He was very embarrassed by that. But his college and his high school friends just treated him like the old Bob, and it made him feel so great once kind of witnessed that happening, that I was very happy to have them to go off with them, like go to lunch, and they even took him on weekends. I mean, towards the end, he wasn't really able to do that, but they still really moved heaven and earth to spend time with them. And once I just saw how well that was going, what it did for him, if I wanted to bring him joy, this was the best way to do it. Was to allow, him to spend time with the guys. And, he would go off with them and he'd complain about me, of course, because I was so protective, but there were some things I had to do. Like he wasn't able to drink after a certain time and able to use the phone. And, he definitely complained about that when he was with his buddies, which is great. That was great. It really made him feel just like himself again, which was such a gift. It is difficult though, because when you have these experiences as a caregiver and like, for example, drinking could cause seizures in them. And people had a really difficult time with me not allowing him to drink anymore. Man, I had to because it could have killed him. But it was those kind of things. Because also with early onset, he looked so handsome until really right before he died. So people would be surprised when I said, well, he can't do this and he can't do that because it was dangerous for him. And that was difficult. That's something I think every caregiver, especially with early onset, that they have that experience of people kind of questioning their judgment or, maybe criticizing them for being too protective or not allowing him. But that's just our cross to bear, to be honest. Because a doctor once told me, I was saying that was one of my biggest issues was socially. He has got all these wonderful friends and family members that love him so much, but it was difficult if they questioned my judgment. And the doctor was like, "That's your job. Just do your job. Just protect him." But that was hard. It makes you feel very unsupported and isolated as a caregiver. And really, they're just coming from a place of love. They love Bob so much and they wanted him to be happy. And I was coming from a place of wanting to keep him safe and alive as long as possible.
The journeys are very different. Even with Alzheimer's, what can be perfectly fine for somebody can be not fine for somebody else. I believe that that we need to start being more conscious about how we communicate and just letting people know this is why things are this way.
Mm.
And we forget, like, I know that you come, but it usually comes as a confrontation. Like, hey, I said no, and the other is like, well, they want it, so why
Right,
not?
right.
Like, hey, like he wants an extra drink. Like, he's been drinking, like, it's not heavily drinking, he's not drunk, he's just had one, but it's if they don't know what happens afterwards. That happened to me with my husband's grandmother. She was itching, and I just got, like, a hand cream, and then one of, her aunts was like, "No, not that cream." She's allergic to a bunch of stuff, and I just apologized. But yeah, that happens, and if you don't know, we don't explain things, so I think we need that as caregivers to let people know what we are expecting from them.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I was so great at that. I think I would say, like, "Please don't give him a beer," or "Please don't do that," but then I think I took it, like, too personally when they would question. I mean, you're in this state of constant stress, and you're traumatized by things that happen, like a seizure and all that, and you don't have the emotional capacity for more carefully and intentionally explaining things at times, but it would be helpful if you could be that way. And I think that's a good thing to sort of focus on is at least grace them with the information. And they still might say, like, well, I don't believe you, or, he looks fine to me, or whatever it is, they still might do that. But I think you're absolutely right. Like, more communication. For most people, I think that's really helpful.
And I think us as caregivers, we just have the information and assume that everybody knows. And I can totally relate to that. For me, it is just common knowledge, and I just think everybody should know what I know. And the truth is that no, they don't have the same experiences that I have, and they might not have that they might not
Right,
know. It is hard as caregivers because we have to educate, and that puts another layer of complexity into what we do.
right.
The caveat is that with that extra layer of complexity into what we do, we can start expanding our network of people that support us.
Exactly.
Because you have support from their friends, and if you were trusting his friends to take good care of him,
Right.
you would be like, "Just go with your friends."
They actually were amazing. I mean, for the most part, they were amazing. I would just say they would ask, especially if you'd be going for a weekend, like how his caregiving needs changed. And they had seen, since they spent more time with them, like the people that spent the most time with him, it was easier to have those conversations because they had witnessed the same things I did. A group of his friends were there when he had a seizure, or they would see that this sort of situation, like too many people would stress him out and it would go badly, or, things like that. So they had the experience. I think it's, for me at least, it was harder with people would see him, occasionally. And truthfully, they were just really sad too to see Bob's decline. It was really sad. And I think people get kind of desperate. They want to do something. They want to try to fix it or try to help them, or they just feel so bad for them. So that's where they're coming from. But you're coming from the place where, you're going to have to live with the consequences, which is terrible. So,
Yeah, it's like you're taking your kids to the grandparents, and grandparents are giving them,
exactly.
3 pounds of chocolate, and then they come back
Right.
home and they can go back to sleep.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Is there anything else you want to share with us?
I think from the caregiver perspective, and I say this in my book at the end, it's really hard to be a caregiver. I mean, I know that might seem obvious, but I think until you've lived that day to day, the stress, the grief, until you live that journey, and you just don't realize how bad it makes you feel about yourself and how you're constantly questioning yourself. And, you become so isolated because you're home with the person that you're caring for. And whether or not people understand the journey you're on, the truth of the matter is you do spend quite a bit of time alone. I mean, or alone with the person that you're caring for. And that time that you're spending is stressful and difficult. So it's hard not to feel bad about yourself. I mean, that just have that inner, like, my life is hard. And, why is this the case? And I think it's really so important for every caregiver to take that time and instead of looking at it from like my life is so hard and why do I have this, just look at how amazing you are. Like, look at the fact that yes, you've been given this huge burden, this huge job, but you're doing it. You're accomplishing something and you're dealing with things that most people in the world never have to deal with. And you're surviving. Survived. You took care of your person as hard as it was and stressful and sad as it was. You did it, and most people would not be able to. I mean, so I think that we should like try to get away from that feeling of just feeling bad about ourselves and get to the feeling of congratulating ourselves. I mean, you really should feel like you're the greatest because, first of all, you did it from a place of love, which is amazing. And you sacrifice so much of your time and so much of your identity to completely devote yourself to taking care of that person. I mean, how great are you for doing that? And so if I could give one piece of advice, I say this a lot, but at the end of the day, just say, like, good for you. Pat yourself on the back, congratulate yourself. It's true. You're not exaggerating your accomplishments. What you did was pretty amazing. So pat yourself on the back, and I think it'll make facing the next day, when you're not sure you're going to be able to get through it, but if you know that you're going to end that day with having some moments of self-reflection and some self-congratulation, I just think it can make the journey, you can survive that journey as long as you just keep feeling good about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for coming, Susie. This was such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it too. Thanks. I want to see pictures of your puppy.
For sure.
Hey, just for you to know, the content presented in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any affiliated organizations or sponsors. If you need additional advice, please contact the right partner for you.